in Jericho, one of the things that I think we do that's fairly unique is that we have career counselors located at each site. Each and every building that we have has a full-time employment counselor. Well, maybe one has a part-time, but mostly they have a full-time employment counselor, not a slash employment counselor or career counselor, but a full-time career counselor at each location, sometimes more than one, depending on the size of the building. And this also includes other programs and scatter site, all have dedicated career counselors. That results in a caseload of about 50 to 75 people. That may sound high, but I'll get to a little more of why that's actually quite low. And again, these are in addition to the social services staff that are on site and the case management staff that are on site. Our relationship with the tenants around employment starts very, very early on. In fact, we actually do it before they move into the buildings. So our career counselors, two of whom just enter the room, actually go out and do outreach for tenants. And they go out with the social services staff when they're conducting outreach in shelters and things like that, getting shelters to know about Jericho, and really emphasizing the employment components of it. From there, the career counselors sit in on the intakes. So pretty much, I'm sure most people operate this way, that you have some kind of intake interview for your buildings. You might see 2 or 3 potential tenants, and they're interviewed. Something like that, I'm hoping, yes. So at that point, career counselors are involved, and they're again re-emphasizing the employment services that we offer and kind of the expectation of work. After a tenant does move into Jericho Project, within 2 weeks, preferably even the first week, they receive a separate assessment, separate and apart from the social services intake and assessment that I'm sure most programs have. And this intake is pretty standard in terms of the employment world. It's your employment history and your educational background, hobbies, interests, where you're headed, what you like to do. And we do this whether or not the person has expressed an interest in employment. And we do this in part because we feel that sometimes just the fact that we're mentioning it can start to motivate people, and it can get people thinking about it. Up until now, they've been primarily homeless, and they've been thinking about housing and kind of basic needs. Going from the shelter into housing is usually the scenario. And so they haven't actually been able to think beyond that. And this starts that conversation as quickly as possible. And we think it's important to start it as quickly as possible to keep the ball rolling. There's kind of the thought that you could have somebody move in, stabilize, kind of get to know the building and the tenants and the surrounding community. What we find, though, is when we do something like that, we let people have several months to kind of settle in. That's exactly what happens, is they settle in, and they don't keep the ball rolling. And it's easier to keep a wheel that's in motion to keep it moving. So we start the conversation very, very early on. It doesn't mean they're going to get placed in a job within 2 weeks, but it means that they're going to meet with the career counselor and start that assessment. And the assessment is fairly lengthy. It's often done over 2 sessions. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to be clear about is sort of the structure of the Workforce Opportunities Department within Jericho. So as I mentioned, career counselors are located in each building or program. And they are embedded with the team of the site. So they're in case conferences with the rest of the team in the building. Whatever types of meetings go on in the building, administrative or again clinical types of meetings, they're involved in all of those meetings. In addition, though, they actually are part of this Workforce Opportunity Staff department. So there are essentially 8 career counselors, and they report to 2 supervisors. And those supervisors report to me. And this provides the in-depth knowledge that's needed around workforce development. I think one of the things that's very hard, and it sounded like from when Sophia asked you questions, it sounds like most folks who are doing employment services haven't been doing it very long, most of you who are in the room, and most of you are doing it with very few people in your agency that are also doing it. And I think that can be very, very hard, and there needs to be kind of a coming together of the people who are doing the employment services to share resources, support each other, and to create, to have the supervision around the in-depth knowledge that's needed around quality workforce development. And that's just very hard to do if they're sort of only reporting to the people in the buildings, the supervisors within the buildings, the program directors in the buildings. So we have a decentralized career counselors and a centralized supervision standpoint. Every year, about 30 to 50% of our tenants go to work. Now that is compared to about 5% to 20% in standard supportive housing. So a lot more of our folks are going to work, and about 20% are either at the same time or usually separately going to education. So it could be secondary education or vocational skills training of one type or another. So those numbers compare quite favorably. And I want to kind of go back over, I guess, what are some of our core beliefs that help get us to those numbers. Core beliefs are, one, that everyone can work. Again, starting from that conversation from the beginning, from outreach and intake, and we start with the conversation that everybody can go to work. That's something that we have to not only incorporate in our own belief system, but within the building and all the social services, program directors, psychiatrists. Because work is not detrimental to the recovery process. It is not detrimental to maintaining sobriety. It is not detrimental to someone's mental health. And that is one of the hardest things that I think we find to get across to either new staff coming in or psychiatrists. I can't tell you how many times the staff come back to me and the psychiatrist told the client they shouldn't go to work because it's too stressful. Staying at home, watching soap operas all day, and having no thought of what your future is going to be and how you can move forward in life is stressful. Work can be stressful, but we can also have it be a normalizing process to someone's life. It gives them purpose, it gives them a central place to go, it organizes their day. How am I doing on time?
Perfect.
A few more? Okay, where are we going? So top of the second page. As much as we're having 30 to 50% of our folks going to work throughout the course of the year, that also means another 20% in education. That still means 30% or so are not, and we don't like that. So what we're trying to do is figure out, what is it that's preventing those other 30% or so from not going to work? And we realize that we kind of need to organize people into different groups in order to kind of attack the issue. What are the barriers? And so what are these different groups? And we realize that motivation and somebody's sort of engagement with us as staff is a critical component. Now, I'm sure all of you have had some of this along the way of clients, not necessarily engaging in services. So we certainly have that. And so we took a look at people's engagement level with us, and we took a look at their potential for work, often, potential gauged around medical issues, age, education level. And none of those things are preventive somebody from going to work, but they are barriers that need to be addressed. And we took a look at this and tried to figure out, how many people do we have that are in sort of these different categories. And what we found is that we have about 20% of the people who are doing great. Great. Going to work, talking to us all the time, great. We have about another 34%, almost a third, that have a lot of medical issues going on usually, or are destabilized psychiatrically right now, whatever the issue might be, or just a lot of appointments, enormous amounts of appointments going on, and they're not engaging with us either. And so those are going to be very hard to work with. Then there's another 20% or so of the folks who actually talk to us all the time, but have all those sets of issues too. Usually medical is a big concern. Now so trying to approach that group of people is very different than another group of people we have, which is almost a third, 28 or so percent, that have high potential to go to work, but don't seem to have an interest in going to work. They may be on the younger side, maybe have a little more education, they just don't have a lot of appointments going on, there's sort of not a lot else going on in their life that might be preventing them from going to work. But it's their own belief system about their ability to go to work, or their own ideas about work, what it might do benefits-wise, or this kind of thing. And that's a different strategy. So this is something we've just done over the last 2 months, trying to categorize our folks and get a sense of who needs what. So stay tuned. Come back next year if I'm invited back, and I might have some results, because we're going to develop different strategies around each one of those different groups. A couple quick things. If you want more folks in your buildings to go to work, don't wait for them to come to you. They're not likely to. You're going to get the 20% they're going to come to you, and the rest of the folks aren't. That 20% are the easiest folks. So if you want to get to that next level, you're going to have to go to them, and and I don't mean just a flyer up on the wall or a flyer under their door. I mean every day. Our career counselors are mandated every single month to speak to every single tenant on their caseload. So that's why they have 50 to 75. Obviously, 50 to 75 are not talking to them back. Some of them are saying, get lost. But we try. So regardless of what they say, we go to them every single month, and we try to put that idea of work back into their minds. You got to educate staff a lot about how work is positive to the recovery process and maintaining sobriety. And one other quick thing. When you're working with people who are in entry-level jobs, which is where most of our tenants will land, they will mostly land in sort of entry-level positions, at least to start. People quit their supervisors in entry-level positions. They get fired by their supervisors, or they quit their supervisors. People don't generally quit the work environment. They don't quit their coworkers as much. They quit their supervisors. So when you're looking at job placement, focus on the relationship with the supervisor. So if you can find great supervisors in a company, try and funnel people towards that person who's got that heart and who's going to work people more. And in retention, focus on the relationship and talk to people a lot about the supervisor relationship, because again, that's where they're going to run into the majority of problems, is their direct supervisor.